Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of True Crime with Caitlyn. Today I'm going to tell you all about the case of a very young woman who, after leaving her friend's house one evening to go and meet her boyfriend, was never seen again. 8 weeks later, her remains were found in the most unthinkable place. This is the murder of Sylvia Fleming. Today's case takes place in Omagh, County Tyrone, Northern Ireland, east of Belfast and just over 30 miles away from Derry. On the 11th of October 1980, Sylvia Fleming was born, the youngest of 3 daughters from her parents, her older sisters being Josie and Kathleen. The 3 girls had a difficult start to their life. Their mum wasn't around for whatever reason, and so their father Patsy tried to look after them, but he struggled. Josie would say that he tried his best to look after them, but he just couldn't. The girls would be placed into foster care, and they would go to and from different foster homes and foster families, but gratefully, they were never separated. Josie, Kathleen and Sylvia were extraordinarily close. They were the only family that each of them had, and I can imagine that this cemented a tight bond between them. They would do everything together, stuck together like glue. They were very open with one another. They weren't the type to be keeping secrets, etc., away from each other. That was how they came to learn that Sylvia was being abused, which absolutely broke them. Josie was the oldest, and she was like the mother hen. She was very protective over her sisters. Despite having her more difficult upbringing, this didn't affect who Sylvia was as a person. She was said to have lit up any room that she walked in. She was very positive, happy, she had a good outlook on life. She stuck in at school and was very determined to do well because she had aspirations of getting into a really good career and she wanted to make a life for herself. She was an artist, a brilliant drawer who was very creative. At her school, her friends would describe her as popular and someone that everyone liked. When she left school in 1997, Sylvia went on to college where she'd done hairdressing before finding work as a carer within a nursing home. That December 1997, 17-year-old Sylvia would meet 26-year-old Stephen Peter Scott. Stephen was relatively new to Omagh and was throwing a party in his flat on Lisa Nelly Heights. Stephen worked as a part-time fireman. He was into fitness, bodybuilding, and all round looking after himself. He was a man who very much valued his masculinity. He wanted to appear a certain way. How he was looked at and perceived was something that was absolutely vital to him. So he presented himself in a certain way. He was described as charming, alluring. He wore nice new designer clothes, he was well groomed, he set up a boxing group for the local teenagers who very much admired, respected and looked up to Stephen, which is something that he loved. He wanted to be the ideal, perfect, masculine, manly man, and when he was given the nickname Bulldog, he probably thought that he had achieved this goal. Sylvia really took a liking to Stephen, but Josie wasn't so taken. She thought he was a self-centered attention seeker, but after going to his flat, she could see just how smitten Sylvia was with him, despite their 9-year age gap. Again, 17 and 26. Sylvia started spending more and more time at the flat, where Stephen often threw house parties. Only his guests weren't his co-workers or people that he met at the gym, for example. Almost always, he was hanging around with kids, like 14-year-old, 15-year-old children, throwing parties for them, inviting them over and providing them with alcohol and cigarettes. They probably thought that Stephen was the best thing since sliced bread for doing this for them, and he soaked up their praises. It made his head and his ego balloon. With this though, he thought that he was their boss and that he was someone that could force them to do things. He could control them. Implement and control is something that is very important to Stephen, which in this case with these children, he probably was able to do. He was a big built, stocky, intimidating man. They are in his house and these are literal children. If Stephen asked one of them to do something for him, often they would follow his orders blindly. Going back to Stephen's idea of ideal masculinity, how that physically looks and what traits a manly man has, two men he looked up to greatly were Charles Manson and Ted Bundy. And side note, but why is it always the same serial killers that people who go on to kill often fixate on? The case from the other week of Brian Cohey, who murdered Warren Barnes, he also had an affinity for Ted Bundy, but then also Jeffrey Dahmer. And I find when I'm going through my research, it's almost always the same serial killers. It's Dahmer, it's Bundy, it's the Night Stalker, it's the Zodiac. And I don't know, I just don't know why it is always those ones. Stephen had many true crime books in his collection surrounding the serial killers that he admired. He admired Charles Manson's ability to get people to do whatever he wanted, and also Ted Bundy, who was at the time of his crimes considered smart and attractive, all traits that Stephen wants to embody himself. To him, these two men were examples of the ideal, proper manly man, which in my opinion, these are a far cry from proper manly men. These are all cowards. Despite not getting the best of impressions from this man, Josie trusted Sylvia's judgment. Stephen was obviously making her happy, and Josie wasn't going to be the one to say to Sylvia, you can't do this or you can't do that, you can't see this person, you can't talk to them. She didn't want to control Sylvia. Neither one of the sisters had any idea though of what true monster was hidden under Stephen's skin. The amount of pain, trauma and destruction that he would inflict on their family. If they had any idea, they would have run in the opposite direction.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Greater than 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. See terms.
Quite quickly after the beginning of Sylvia and Stephen's relationship, the sisters of Sylvia Fleming felt the distance that was coming between them. Sylvia had been living with Josie after she had had her baby, and she was excited to be there, to be an auntie. But since meeting Stephen, she began drifting. On one occasion, this became crystal clear to Josie because there was Sylvia, her little sister, walking down the street hand in hand with Stephen, and she barely stopped to say hello. Josie asked her how she was and if she was coming home that evening. She wanted to see her, and Stephen didn't give Sylvia 2 seconds to reply before pulling her away. Him trying and succeeding in isolating Sylvia from her support network, her sisters, her family, the people that she loves and that she leans on. When I lay this out in very plain terms, it's obvious to see what Stephen's doing and how his actions are abusive, but I think when you're actually living in it, it's not as glaringly obvious. Stephen would shower Sylvia in love, adoration. He made her feel special, like she was the only woman in the world. He could be charming, and as someone who was given up by her father and didn't have the most stable of homes growing up, and as someone who was very loving and affectionate, Sylvia would eat it right up. All of those actions would make her so happy, and so it's no wonder that she became so smitten with Stephen that she was blinded by her love for him. Within just a matter of weeks, Stephen's behaviour and attitude towards Sylvia completely shifted. She was now completely under his wing, and he knew that she would put up with and tolerate almost anything because she was in love with him. He had successfully groomed her. Stephen would humiliate and embarrass Sylvia in front of their friends. He was nasty, he was degrading towards her, calling her names, making her feel stupid and worthless, just hammering away at her confidence and her self-esteem. I know that I've already mentioned it a few times, but I want to keep on reiterating that this is a vulnerable 17-year-old girl. He was probably doing all this to show off and to show that he had control, thinking he was big and he was hard and he was clever. But to me, a fully grown man doing all of this to someone who is literally a minor, Sylvia is still a child, I don't think he's big or clever, and no one likes a bully. But the children he was surrounding himself with probably did. They were probably hyping him up and encouraging him to do it because they didn't know better. Sylvia was usually a girl who was able to handle her own and stick up for herself. She wasn't a pushover by any means of the word, but there was something about Stephen that was stopping her from standing up to him. This wasn't the only abuse that Stephen would subject Sylvia to, and that might be the reason why. She would be forced/coerced into participating in extreme sexual activities. Stephen was violent, dominant, controlling, and on one occasion, Sylvia described to her friend Stephen tying her up, binding her, and then covering her face with a pillow, which she didn't like, enjoy, or want to do. But she felt like she had to. That is not true consent. She felt like she was obliged to satisfy Stephen's sexual appetite, and I personally think that for him, knowing that Sylvia didn't want to be doing these things just made it even more enjoyable for him. That reflecting how much he actually cared about his partner and her feelings. Just a few months after they began dating, Sylvia announced to Stephen that she was pregnant, and he took it bad, exactly how she was expecting him to. He started accusing Sylvia of sleeping with other men and denying that the baby was his, saying that he didn't want to have a child, which would have been heartbreaking for Sylvia. Following this, he actually ended their relationship, kicked Sylvia out, and so she temporarily went to live with one of her friends, a girl named Katrina. Despite all of this though, Stephen wasn't ready to let go of the power and control that he had over Sylvia. He still wanted her to be completely submissive to him. He would invite Sylvia over to the flat for one thing and one thing only: violent, degrading, submissive sex, all of which was escalating. Sylvia would go over to the flat and give Stephen what he wanted. She wanted to keep him happy, and in her mind, she probably thought that this would result in him regretting what he had done and said, hoping that it would bring on a change of heart, that he would reconcile with her, and they would have this baby and live happily ever after. Stephen had already mastered manipulating Sylvia, and I don't doubt that he said these type of things for her to keep her under his wing. On the 3rd of April 1998, Sylvia had just gotten paid from her care worker job where she was doing really well. She left Katrina's flat shortly after 11 p.m. and jumped on the bus heading to Stephen's Lisa Nelly Heights flat, which was just around the corner. After leaving Katrina's home, Sylvia Fleming was never seen again. When Josie and Kathleen heard that Sylvia hadn't returned back to Katrina's home and none of them had heard or seen from Sylvia at any point the next day, they felt in their gut that something was wrong. They repeatedly tried to contact her, eventually getting Stephen on the phone. They had to ring him multiple times before he eventually answered, and he just said that he didn't know where Sylvia was, hadn't seen her. Being the big sister and already having her reservations about Stephen, Josie wasn't going to accept what he said at face value, so she went over to his flat and made her way inside, where there was no sign of Sylvia. Stephen was there, his face beetroot red with fury, and he ushered, almost pushed, and forced the sisters out of his flat. By the afternoon time of the 5th of April, the sisters could wait no longer to see if Sylvia was going to show up, and so Kathleen contacted the police to report her missing. A search goes underway for Sylvia, and Josie, Kathleen, even Stephen take to the streets on foot, walking up and down every single street, alleyway and road, everywhere that they could, hoping to find Sylvia. 2 weeks into the investigation, Stephen is formally questioned. He tells the officers that he doesn't know where Sylvia is or what has happened to her. He admits to them that they had dated for a few weeks at the beginning of the year, but that they had already broken up. He said that he last seen her in late March, and that would be just days before she disappeared. He couldn't be involved or responsible if she had been with Katrina between when he had last seen her and when she had gone missing. Police conducted a search inside of Stephen's flat, and they found nothing of suspicion or interest in there. They even poked their heads in his loft because there was a slim chance that Sylvia could be up there hiding, but she wasn't. Everything looked as they expected. There were no signs of a struggle or anything like that. So they carried on with their investigation, but all of their efforts were fruitless. Sylvia had seemingly vanished. It wouldn't be until 8 weeks later that police got a chilling tip from someone that they would have never expected. A 21-year-old man named Peter was arrested after he had been sort of loitering around Omagh, and the officers suspected that he had a firearm, so they arrested him. Once he was in custody, he told the officers that he had information surrounding the disappearance of Sylvia Fleming, but in return, he wanted off of this charge. Peter revealed to the officers that Sylvia was dead, and he knew where she was buried. She was underneath a house which was under construction on Circular Road in Omagh. On the 31st of May, police descended on the address, and as soon as they walked into the partially built house, they got the undeniable whiff, distinct smell of death, of decay and decomposition. After lifting up some of the floorboards in the kitchen area, pulling it all right back till they were at the earth beneath the house, that is when they saw it. A human arm sticking up from the earth below. They had discovered the body of Sylvia Fleming. Josie recalls being contacted by the officers who told her that they had, quote, found parts of a body. Sylvia Fleming had been dismembered into 8 pieces, all of her limbs being removed and her being decapitated. Her body was found in such a callous, unrecognisable condition that she had to be identified by her dental records. To say that hearing this was devastating to the Flemings would be the understatement of the year. Because there was no signs of foul play, they were clinging onto the hope that Sylvia had left on her own accord. Maybe she had gone to try and clear her head while she decided what she wanted to do about Stephen and about the baby, but that one day she would come back to them. But now, they knew that was never going to happen. Their baby sister was gone. But what had happened to Sylvia? How did she end up dead and dismembered underneath a house? In the late hours of the 4th of April 1998, 17-year-old Sylvia Fleming left her friend Katrina's home and jumped on the bus heading over to the flat of Stephen Scott. When she arrived, she found that Stephen was in the company of 2 children, a 14-year-old boy and a 15-year-old girl. This wasn't unusual because children were the company that Stephen liked to keep. It made him feel big. When Sylvia arrived, she realised that Stephen and the children had been drinking alcohol. Stephen got up from his couch, grabbed her hand and guided her through to the bedroom. Here, they would both drink some alcohol, but unbeknownst to Sylvia, Stephen was spiking her with temazepam. Temazepam is a drug which is commonly prescribed to people suffering with insomnia to help bring on sleep. He then begins to engage in extreme sexual activities with her, the type that Sylvia felt like she couldn't say no to. He begins by binding her by her wrists, the cord going from one hand up and round her neck, down to the other hand, both of which were restrained to the back of the bed. Her ankles were then bound and restrained to the foot of the bed. Using tape, Stephen then covered up Sylvia's eyes, nose and mouth, which would have made it extremely difficult for her to breathe, which would have been absolutely terrifying, especially when you start to panic. Breathing already becomes harder. Then he would take a needle and injected non-diabetic Sylvia with insulin, which could have put her into a coma. Following all of this, she becomes incapacitated, and we don't know what happened next, but I would assume that Stephen assaulted her. Both of the teenagers were still in the room next door, and sometime after Stephen went into the bedroom with Sylvia, he re-emerged and took the teens back into the bedroom with him. He did this to take them to look at Sylvia's body, showing off what he had done, that he had killed her. Earlier that evening, he had said that he was going to do this, but the teens didn't actually think he was being serious, but now they can see that he was, and that he seemed almost excited to be shown this off. He was probably full of adrenaline. Now that he has shown them Sylvia's body, Stephen essentially tells the teenagers that they're involved now. Just by knowing what he has done, he has implicated them. They are just as much involved as he is, to scare them into not talking. He is very manipulative. Stephen managed to convince the young boy to help him dispose of Sylvia's body. Initially, she is stripped naked, wrapped in a blanket, and then hidden in the loft. A couple of hours later that day, the two boys would casually go swimming at a nearby leisure centre, showing just how unbothered they were about what Stephen had done and what they were about to do. Whilst here, they disposed of Sylvia's clothes into a skip out of the back of the leisure centre, but sometime later they went back to retrieve them because they were worried that they would be found and then traced back to them, so the clothes were eventually incinerated. I wonder if there's a connection between Stephen wanting to go swimming after committing the murder, him murdering Sylvia, and then going into a pool which is filled with chlorine, which would eradicate any DNA and evidence on his body. I did think that a little bit, but then I'm not sure about it because of what they were about to do.
Adobe Firefly is the all-in-one creative studio with AI-powered image and video editing for today's creative process. Built for creators of every kind, Firefly helps you generate, edit, and experiment fast. Because the asks aren't getting smaller, the budgets aren't getting bigger, and the timelines, oh yeah, still tight. With all the best creative AI models in one place, Firefly brings your ideas to life. Unlock a better way to make with Adobe Firefly.
Once returning to the Lisa Nelly flat, Sylvia's body would be pulled from the loft, dragged to the bathroom, and put inside of the bath and dismembered. Using a hacksaw and an array of different sharp knives, Stephen dismembered Sylvia into 8 pieces. The cuts that he'd done were later described as precise, careful, and methodical. Doing this would have easily taken him hours, a lot of time and strength, him probably being fueled by his hatred of Sylvia or his worried about being caught. To add insult to injury, Stephen would rifle through Sylvia's coat pocket and stole £25 which she had withdrawn from her well-earned wage and spent it on bin bags and cleaning supplies to clean up the crime scene and dispose of her body. This is all happening the day after she left her friend's home, and so already the people who love her are worrying about where she is. When Josie stormed to Stephen's flat after not being satisfied with what he was saying on the phone, Stephen must have been shaken with paranoia because Josie was looking around. She eyes up the loft where Sylvia's body was stored just the night before, and as Stephen was essentially kicking them out, Josie locked eyes on several backpacks at his door. Backpacks which were filled to the brim with her sister's remains. This probably put the shits right up Stephen, and he set out to dispose of the remains as quickly as he could. So once again, enlisting the help of that teenage boy, they both wore and carried the backpacks, taking them to the housing development on Circular Road. Interesting detail here, but during this walk, Stephen point blank refused to carry the bag which held Sylvia's head in it. He forced the teen boy, the child, to carry that one. The two weren't able to dispose of all of the remains on this one singular trip, and that is when Stephen enlisted the help of Peter, who was the one who would go on to tell the police where Sylvia was. Stephen detailed to Peter, gloating about what he had done, that he had murdered Sylvia, he had dismembered her, and he needed help hiding her body. And Peter was more than happy to help. As Stephen was later participating in the search for Sylvia, when he was out and about walking the streets with the sisters and other volunteers, they actually went nearby Circular Road when he made an eerie comment. He said, quote, "You shouldn't go up there. You never know what you might find." Upon the discovery of Sylvia Fleming's remains, Stephen Scott, both of the teens, and Peter were all arrested. The news of Sylvia's barbaric murder infuriated the tight-knit community of Omagh, and it sparked riots throughout the town. People were firebombing houses and putting windows out, targeting the people and family of those involved with the crime. During his first couple of rounds of questioning, Stephen denied his involvement in the murder. It wouldn't be until his third interview that he began to talk. He admitted that Sylvia did come to his flat and that the sexual activity was something she was excited for and agreed to, that he had tied her up as part of a joke. He then details how she was tied up, both of her hands being connected to her neck and tied at the bottom of the bed, and her bound feet being tied to the bottom. He said that's when he invited the teens into the bedroom, and that it was the young boy who pulled on the cord tightened around Sylvia's neck that he must have pulled on it too tight, resulting in Sylvia being strangled to death. Stephen said in a panic he had tried to perform CPR on Sylvia and detailed exactly what he'd done, which the police knew was an absolute pack of lies. Stephen is a firefighter, so being able to perform CPR quickly and effectively is something that should be like second nature to him. When asked why, what possessed him to inject Sylvia with insulin, he blankly said that he just wanted to see what would happen. Sheer curiosity. He admitted to aiding in the dismembering and disposing of Sylvia's remains, but again put that down to him being in panic mode. This was again not believed by the officers, because who in panic mode goes for a little casual swim after they've just seen someone get murdered or murdered someone? Stephen is happy to admit to a lot of different things, but actually committing the murder of Sylvia is not one of them. The Lisanelli flat would go through a more thorough forensic examination, and in the drain pipes underneath the bath, they would discover congealed blood confirmed to be that of Sylvia's. Stephen Scott's trial began at Ballymena Crown Court in March 2000. As the trial went on, the details surrounding what happened to Sylvia, a vulnerable, pregnant, 17-year-old girl, were so harrowing that it reduced the people in the gallery to tears, including Josie and Kathleen, who had to listen to all of those details about their baby sister. On the opposite end of that, Stephen showed no emotion and absolutely no remorse. He would go on to be found guilty of the murder of Sylvia Fleming and was handed a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 19 years to serve. He was released on licence in 2017 and lived in the Dromara area, which is about an hour and a half away from Omagh. Here he found work on a farm, but after breaching his licence, him obtaining/using a firearm and ammunition, he was rearrested and recalled back to prison. During his interviews, he said that he only had the gun and the ammunition because it was relevant to his work on the farm, but his boss couldn't or didn't confirm that. Nevertheless, it was a breach of his licence and he found himself back behind bars in 2023, along with an additional 12 months added onto his sentence. I couldn't find anywhere if he is still imprisoned or if he has since been released. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Don't forget to follow the podcast so that you never miss a new upload. You can find photos over on Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn. I appreciate you all for being here, and I'll catch you all on the next one.